Yes, hello and welcome back. This is Code with SDM, and today we are going to continue with our video series. As you remember, last video was video number 3, and today we are going to continue with video number 4. So on a recap, on our last video, we had a way of adding the budgets. So we see on how you can start to manage the budgets on your expense application. And we have seen on how the user can be able to see the listing of the budget regarding their corresponding categories. Also, we have seen on how the user can be able to create the new categories, how to edit them, and also to delete them. Okay, so in today's video, we are going to start to work on the expenses. So let's start to work on expenses directory by creating the required Livewire components. So let's go to the terminal here, and then let's run the following command to create the new Livewire component. So we're going to say make, then full colon, Livewire, then the name of the component should be expense list, and then I'll click enter. Yeah, so this one has created the new component, and you can see from the component we have the class and we have the view. Okay, so now let's open the class, and from here is where we are going to define the logic, and on the blade file is where we are going to pass the front end of our code. Okay, so now let's start by creating the required properties. So let's define the public properties, or the required public properties, and then we are going to start by the following. So we have the search, because we want our user to be able to search through the expenses. Also, we want to have the selected category, which should be an empty string by default. Also, we want to have the start date. So this is for filtering, start date. Okay, which we can put like an empty string, and we're gonna have the end date. Then we are going to have another one, public, then sort by, because we are going to see on how you can do sorting. So by default, the sort by should be, we should sort by date, and then we are going to have a sort direction, which should be descending by default. And after that, we are going to have another check or a flag that we will use to check if we want to show the filters or not. So here we are going to have show filters, which by default should be false. Okay, after that, let's define a mount function, which will be used to initialize our data. Okay, so here we are going to have the mount function, and from the mount function we are going to show the default current month. So we are going to generate it from the instance of Carbon. Okay, so here the default to current month. Okay, so we are going to say if empty, then the start date. Okay, so if the start date is empty, means, oh, this should be a function, and then we're going to say, so the start date should be an instance of now, then we can just say start of a month. So use the start of a month, then you can format the date so that it can match with the date that we want to show on the screen. Okay, so we'll just use this one. So it will be a year, month, and then day. Okay, so this will be the default way of getting the current month. Okay, then for the end date, so now we have the start date, so the end date we are going to do the other way around of this one. So we're going just to change here to be end of a month. Okay, yep, and after that everything remains the same. And now the other thing that we need to do is to define the computed property that will help us to get the listing of all expenses. So let's define the computed property of expenses. Okay, as I've mentioned before, the computed properties, these help you to get the data and then catch them, or get the value from the database and then it will catch them, so that you can be able to use them on the future uses or on future request. Okay, so this is the helps you when you want to maintain optimization of your application. Okay, so here let's define a public function, then we are going to name it expenses. Okay, and after that we need to make sure that this is an a computed property. So let's give it this attribute, which is this one, and make sure that you have imported it like this one. See, and down here we want to have the following things. So the first, we need to create this variable called the query, which will store the instance of queries. Okay, so we are going to say expense, which is our model, and then we are going to call the relationships that we need, which will be the category relationship, which should be available here, which is this one. Okay, and after that let's call the where condition. So we're going to say, so basically this is a scope that we defined. So it is a scope, so for user, and then we're going to get the currently logged in user. So we want to get all the categories, I mean the expenses with their categories, but all that are belonging to the logged in user. Because if you go back here, you see, so we have this scope which is called for user. So this will help to get all the expenses that belongs to the logged in user. So that's why here you see I passed the user ID, and from here you can see we have the query and the user ID. Okay, so now that's fine. And if this gives you this error which says this is not found or undefined, so you can use the other way around by using this helper method, which you can just say user, then you can get the ID from it. Okay, so by doing that, the code is remaining clean. Okay, so after that then we want to return this data to our user. Okay, so we're going to say return. So we are going to say return, then query, but then we may need to paginate our data. Why? Because the expenses basically can be a lot of data. Okay, so we may need to let's say to paginate for performance issue. Okay, So let's say we can paginate, let's say, to 10 datas per page, okay, like this way. But now we want to sort this data automatically to, let's say, by using the sort direction that we've already defined here. So we have the sort by and the sort direction. So what we are going to do is just to say sort or order by, and then you can see we need to pass the column and then in the sort direction. So for the column, we are going to use the date of expenses, and then the sort direction should be the sort direction that we want to use. So sort direction, okay. But remember, already we have defined this one as the default value here on sort by, so means we need to use this public property instead of this static data. So because the user can use other way around to sort the data, okay. So here we can just pass the public property, which is dynamic, and here we can just say this way, okay. So means now we will get all the expenses, but with the sort or order by. So on order by, we pass the sort by and the sort direction, okay. After that, now let's consider when the user, let's say, do a search on our expenses. So when the user do the search, means we are supposed to find a way to apply those searches. So here, let's say apply search filters, okay. Let's say search and filters. This makes more sense, okay. So after that, we are going to have the if conditions. So what we are going to do is to have an if condition here, and then look for this property. If the search property is not empty or it have any data, so what we are going to do is to run a query and add this constraint on our where condition. So we're going to say where, then the title of our expenses or our expense should be like, and then you have to mention the following. So you have to say, when you use these symbols, I've already explained it in my previous videos, but you have to understand this. When you are adding these symbols on the SQL commands, means if you add it on this side and don't add it on this side like this way, so means it will look if there is any title that starts with the value that you pass here. But if you add it only on the front side and you remove it from this side like this way, means you are trying to find any title that is ending like the value that you pass here. But if you leave it this way by adding both on back and front, means you are checking for the full text. So you are trying to match the text that you pass here with any title that is found inside your expenses table, okay. So that's why we are using both on the front and on back, okay. So after that, we need also to check for description. So we need to say where, then the field should be description, okay, and then we can say like, and then on description 2 we need to use the same way. So pass the value, or you can just copy this one for simplicity and paste it here, okay. So that way. So now means if user try to do a search on our data, so it will filter by checking this value. If there is any value on search, means it is going to check on these fields and if there is any value, means it is going to amend it on this particular query. After that, this query will order that value that has been found it will order by using this sort by and then the sort direction. After that, if there is more than 10 data, they will be paginated, and after that they will be available to our blade file here. Okay, so let me save the file. So now this is fine. So the next filter that can be applied is this one. So when the user change the category, so means here if there is a selected category, means we need to have a filter or the constraint on our query, which is by checking the category ID of the selected value against the database data or against the value that we get from here. Okay, so this is when we are going to add that filter, but also when the user change the start date and end date. Okay, so we need also to add the where conditions to get those values. Okay, so what we are going to do here, we're just going to check for the date, but we are not going to format this value. So let me just remove this value and leave it this way. Okay, and after that, let's close this condition similar way to, but this one should be okay, this should be greater than or equal. That should be the operator here. So greater than or equal to this start date. Okay, so on the end date should be the vice versa of that one. Okay, so it should be less than, okay, this way. And after that, now the last thing that we need to do, because we have already added all the constraint, so means now we need to have a way to show this data on our page. But for the simplest way that you can use here is to pass those values here. Like for example, expenses that we defined from this computed property, so you can access them by using this expenses, and then from here you can just call the expenses value, okay, like this way. So means this we didn't define it here on public properties, but because we defined it as a computed property, so means you can be able to access it by using this way. Means Livewire will understand that this is a public property, but it is a computed one, like this one. Okay, and also we need also to get the total amount of all the expenses that we have on this page. Okay, so to get the total expenses that we have on this page, means we need to define another computed property, because here we are supposed to show the total amount. Okay, so total amount. So because we need the total amount, so we just need to say something like this one, and we are going to define this property up here. Okay, so we're just going to do the following. So we're going to say public function total. Okay, and then from this total, we are just going to call and define a new query instance, and then we're going to say expense, then for user as we did before, then pass the auth here like this way. Okay, and then after that, from that query, means we can apply the search and other filters as we did before. So we can apply these filters similar way to here, because we want to recalculate this total. So when these changes are done, so we want to recalculate this one. Okay, so it means after applying those filters, So we need to return the query. So to return the query, we need to say query, then we want to get the sum of which field. It should be amount field, okay, which we have already defined it on our model here, okay, which is this one. Okay, after that, now we were able to pass the total. Then the last thing is the number, the categories, because we want to categorize our expenses. So here we are just going to pass this one, but let's define these categories. Let's say so we need to get the property for getting, or the computed property for getting the categories. So we just need to say, oh, I forgot to add this one to be computed. So apply this attribute. Okay, similar way here. And then let's define this one. So public function categories. Oh, this should be categories, okay? And after that, now we need just to return the category model, okay? And then we can just say where the user ID equals to the user ID of the logged in user, and then we need to order by, then by the name of the category, okay? And after that, now we have the categories, we have the total amount, and also we have the expenses. That's what we passed here, okay? And after that, let's say when you want to, let's say, to sort the data, so we need to define the function that will be used to sort the data. So here on sorting, we are going to have the following public function, which we are going to call it sort by, and then basically you should pass here the value of the field that you want to sort by, okay? And then here we are going to have if condition, okay? And on this if condition, we are going to check if the sort by will be equals to the field that we have passed there, then we should execute the following statement. So sort direction should be equals to this, then sort direction, then you can do the following, okay? So means you're just going to update this sort direction basing on the field that you defined. So when the field, let's say, that you passed here is the title of the expenses, so means the sort direction of the of the title will be, if it was ascending, we should change it to descending, okay? And if the sort direction was descending, means we are going to make it to be ascending. So it's just a flipping way around, okay? And then after that, we need to have an else block. On this else block, we are going to define the following. So we are just going to assign the sort by that field, because here, if the sort by and the field are matching, means this was the active field on the sort by. So we don't need to assign it again. So we just need to change their sorting direction. But if that's not the case, means this was not selected at first, so we need to assign the field to the sort by, means we are going to replace this one, and after replacing it, then you should add the sort direction. So we just need to say this sort direction then should be let's say by default ascending. Okay, so you can just do something like that. Okay, and after that we are going to have the sort by function, which is very useful when we started to look on our view. Okay, so and after that let's say you want to define a function or a button for like a functionality for deleting. And why I'm completing this component, because I want when we finish about the class, then we are going to finish about the front, and then we are done with this component, and then we go to the next component, which should be the form. Okay, so let's make it a little bit quick. So let's finish it here. So we have another one for deleting the expense. Okay. So here on deleting the expense, we are going to have the following function called the delete. Let's say you can name it like this way, delete expense, but we are going to pass the expense ID. Okay, and after that, inside this expense delete expense function, we're just going to find or fail. So we're just going to say expense, but here I want to find or fail. So if it fails, it should be able to send or to throw an error. Okay, and after that we're just going to have an if condition and then say if the expense then user ID is not equals to the ID of the logged in user. Okay, so if they are not the same, we need to abort this functionality. Okay, because it means the user is not authorized to perform that function. Okay, so let's say we want to return the 403, and then on the message you can give any kind of message. So for example, you can say you are not authorized from this function. Okay, so you can leave it that way, but if you remove it, so Laravel will give you the default message. Okay, and after that, if that's not the case, we need to delete the expense, and after that we need to flash the message from the session. Okay, so from the session we're just going to flash the message. It should be this way, and then we can say expense deleted successful. Okay, so means now we have everything that we need to start to build our application, and what we need next is to have the following lifecycle hooks. So if you don't know about the lifecycle hooks, go to the Livewire documentation. So these are basically the functions that will be generated during the different event of your let's say of your lifecycle of your component. Okay, so for example, you can see this is called on a particular event. So for example, before or after, or when you are initializing the component, when you are updating properties and something like that. Okay, so for example, here you see there is this lifecycle hook called the updating. So when some of the components, some of the properties that we have here, like when the user is updating the category, or when the user is updating the search, or when they are updating the start date and end date. So we want to refresh the page. By doing what? We want to reset the pagination, because for example, when the user is doing the first search, let's say you are paginating data to this first 10, okay, but let's say the user has navigated to another page which has only 2 values. Okay, on that page, let's say we have only 2 values. So when you are doing the search, means this search will only apply to those 2 values. So what we need to do is to reset. So when you are updating the value, so it should reset the navigation, and then it will apply the filter basing on all data. Okay, so what we're going to do is to add those lifecycle hooks here. So I'm just going to do the following. So I'm just going to call these functions public, and there is a better example if you don't understand that. For example, let's say you want to format a certain value when you do update. Okay, so for example, this one. So when the user is updating the value, let's say the value of the username. Okay, so when the value is updated, you want to change it from the any kind of use case or for any case to lower case. So this is the best example that you can use. So for example, this is using the updated, means when this value is already updated, means it is already changed. Okay, so that's when you are going to make this value to be in a lowercase. So this is the better example actually, but there is another way of doing that. Let's say by using this way. So you just give the name of lifecycle hook and then the name of the property. So the name of the property, you need to make it to be in a camel case. So for example, in our action here, so you just need to say public function, then you need to say updating, then the property that we are doing, let's say it is a search. So if you already here we have the property called the search, which is this one. So when you are creating the lifecycle hook for that, you need to use this way. Okay, and after that we just need to do the reset page. Okay, but this one will not work. Why? Because here, if you see, this is not defined. Why? Because when you are doing this reset, the main function of reset page, this is only works when you are using the with pagination trait. So means we need to use here with pagination trait. Okay, and after adding that one, means that's when even this pagination will work. So if you don't add that one, means this will not work on your Livewire component. And you can see now this function is enabled, and it is you can be able to use it. Okay, so after that we need to add another ones for the other properties. So I'll just paste it like this way. So we have the other one for selected category, for start date, and also for end date. So now we have everything that we need. So the next step will be to add the another function which will be helpful a little bit. I'll show you why we need this function and I'll explain to you. So we need this function called the clear filters. Clear filters will help us to reset these fields to their original state. Okay, so after you have added this let's say filters here, so a way to remove these filters and return it to the original data, so this function will be helpful. So we'll just call it to return this to an empty string, this to an empty string, this to the current date, and this to the current end of a month. Okay, so after that then we are going to reset the page again. So this is what we are going to have on expense listing component. So now let's go to the view, and here on the view, as I was doing on the previous videos, I'll just paste the source code and then I'll explain to you one by one, and then we are going to have a way to understand this very quickly so that the video won't take so long. Okay, so up here, as you can see, we have this outer div, okay, which have these changes, but here let me just use the light mode for today. Okay, so let's do that. And let's use the light mode, which you can see all the things that we did before, they look perfect even on light mode. See? Yeah. So now let's finish up here. So let's first register this component into our routes here, which is on web.php, and then here we need to say the new route should be down here. So let's say this will be for expenses, and it is going to be like this way. So route, then get, then we are going to say expenses, and then we're going to say expense list. Okay, and then we're going to say this should be a class, but its name should be expenses dot index. Okay, like this way. Okay, remember to save the file, and after that we need to add this one to our sidebar, okay, which is our layout that we use on our Livewire component. So here after this one, let me copy paste, and then this one should be expenses index, okay, and after that this one should be expenses, okay, this way. And the icon, we can just find a new icon here. So for the expenses, I guess the icon, the best icon should be, let me see, let's try the banknote, I guess. Banknote, yeah, let's try this one. Okay, now let's update this one to banknote. Okay, this one. And after that, if you go back to the application, yep, so here you can see this is the new icon, and this is our new page. So if you click that, you should be redirected to the new page, which is this one. And as you can see here, this is our new page which says expenses, and you can see we have this header which I'm going to explain to you one by one, and we have this button. So let me show you according to the code. Okay, so here we see we have the main screen which has this background which you see here, okay, and then we have the header which is this one, and you can see the background of this header, this one is a white background, and then we have this div which carries the header and its little description on a paragraph, and then we have the add new or add expense button, which is actually a link which link to this page which we didn't already create. So we are going to create it in a minute, but now you can see this is the header, and you can see, so this is a way of separating those two. So you can see here justify between means that's why you see the header is here and the button is here. So when you use the justify between means you're going to leave this space in between, okay. And after that we have this div which carries the main content of our data, where inside it we have this if condition for showing the session messages that you flash from the component here. As you will remember, we did that for deleting. When you do the delete here, you see, so we are flashing the message, so that message is going to be shown here. After that, we have the filters section, which you can clearly see here. So this is the filters section, see, and after that you see inside it you see we have this button called the show or hide the filters. So this will toggle this show filters, which basically this is so this is a property that we defined from the component, which if you remember by default we said it should be a false. So if it is a false means we need to hide the filters, but if it's true we need to show the filters, okay. And after that we have this grid of those filters. So we have a search here, make sure that you are using this attribute of wire model. So bind that property here on this model and make it to be live. And in order for reducing the number of requests sent when you are typing your search, let's say your search constraint, so use this way of debouncing. So after 300 milliseconds, it will stop to send the request to the backend, and after that, it will send the request of that value that you passed through the search field. Okay, and these other ones are just decorations of our field. So you can see up to here. So let me close so that you can see even on this side. Okay, and after that we have the other one for category. This is when you see the use of these categories that we defined here. Okay, so these are the categories. So that's when you see their use here. Okay, and make sure that you bind it to the selected category and make it to be live. Why? Because here we are seeing, so we are using this to track if that was updated. So when you give it a live attribute, means you are tracking it in real time. Okay, then we have the start date, which should be a date field, and you binded the start date and you define the let's say the styling and something like that, the similar way to the end date. So that div ends there, and then we have if show filters, means we need to show the expense count of, let's say, total number of expenses. So this will actually shown when you apply the filter. So when you do something like this, and then you can see showing this number of these expenses, then their total value, and you can hide them by clicking clear filters. Okay, and then if you click hide, then this should be removed. Okay, and after that we have the expense table, which is this one, which will have all the values that we need. But here on defining this let's say table heading, so we pass the this event, so it will help be tracking this event of click. So when the user click on the header, we are going to add the sort by method. So we call this one, and after calling it, it is going to set this as the sorting value. Similar way to the title, you can see, similar way to the amount, and that's what is going to happen. Okay, and after that, here we are going just to show the sort by, which is this one, and then if the sort direction is ascending, so we're just going to give the actually this icon. So we're going to rotate it to this degrees of rotation, and the way around we're just going to leave it normal. Okay, similar way to the category and the title, also the description and amount. Okay, and after that we have the actions. So down here we have the table body, and on table body is where we are going to look through the expenses, but instead of using the for each, we are using the for else, and after that then we loop through those values, then we show the expenses. So we have the date here, so this is at the date, and then we have the category. After the category we have the check if this was auto-generated, and we are going to see the use of this field is basically is when we start to use the recursive or the recurring expenses. That's when we're going to use this field. So for now, just leave it that way, and then we have this one for description, we have the other one for amount, and then remember to format that amount. And after that, we have this div for actions, which you will have the expense edit and the expense delete. Okay, and on the empty side of the for else condition, so remember we have the for else, so the second side of it is empty, so it is just check. If for else means when the data is available, we are going to show the other side, and when the value is empty, we are going to show the following value. Okay, so this says that, let's say no expense found, started tracking your expense to see them here. So here we have this button which is called the add your first expense, and that's when that's what you see actually on the page now. See, so no expense found, start tracking, and when you click this one, you should be redirected to that page, but because that page now is not found, so you should be able to see this 404. Okay, so now the next step is to define this form, and let's do that quickly. So let's start by creating the Livewire component, and after that we are going to update it very quickly. Okay, so we have the expense form. Okay, and after that let's update this one quickly. So we're just going to have the following things. Okay, so here we have the expense ID, which should be a public key property, so I like to use this way. And then we have the public basically amount, which should be an empty string by default. Okay, and also we have the following, so let me just copy them from the database and then I'll paste them here. Yep, so we have the title, description, date, category ID, type of expense, because we have next I'll show you how to add the recurring expenses. So let's start by doing this way. So now we have this way, and after that then we have the recurring frequency, this one. We have the recurring start date, and we have the recurring end date. So remember, all of these three will be used only when you change this one to recurring. Okay, so we are going to see on how that will be useful. So after that, we need to have another flag which will help us to track if the user is doing update or not, or is he editing this value. So it is called is edit. Okay, and by default it should be false. Okay, and after that, now we have the rules messages, or the rules for validation of our fields. So let me just add it here. So these are the rules of validations. So you are not recommended, like you are not forced to do this, because this only gives you the right or the control over your rules when you are applying them on validation. But if you don't like that one, you can apply the validation through the attribute. So you just need to say like let's say validate, which is this one, and after that you need to pass the rules that you need to define. So for example, for the amount, then you are supposed to pass this details inside here. Okay, so just like this. And after that, make sure this is on amount, so you are supposed to do something like this. Okay, so this was the other way around that you can do, but yeah, everyone can use the one that gives him much control. Okay, so this one I believe it is much like a long way of doing it, but this one is the shortest way, which is actually the modern way of doing it. Okay, but I'll stick with this one for now. So you see we have these rules, and if the type of let's say if an expense is recurring, then we need to add these rules as addition. Okay, after that you need to return those rules, and after that you can customize the messages on how they look like when you do it, but for now I'll just leave it that way. So now let's have a function called amount, which we'll use to initialize some of the data. So here we just need to get the expense, and we need to get the expense from the expense model, and then we need to find or fail, okay, and then we need to check for the expense ID, okay, and after that then we need to have an if condition which will check for the authorization of the user, so expense then user ID. If it is not equals to the authenticated user, then we need to abort the function, okay. So this can be 4 and 3. You can pass the message, but just not pass it so that the Laravel will populate the default value, okay. And after that, on this else, basically and then we need to assign the following details from the expense that we get here. So we need to say amount equals to expense amount, then we have the title, we have the description, also we have the expense date, but we need to make sure that this is formatted to this date, to this format, okay. And after that we need also to have the category ID, then we need to have the expense type, then the recurring frequency, then the start date of recurring, okay, and then the last date of recurring, okay. And make sure that these are all formatted. So let's format this one and also this one, okay. And after that we need to have another thing which basically I want to refactor this code. So what I'm going to do, so instead of doing this here, so we can cut all of this code, okay, and let me just do the following. So we can cut that and use it on another separate function which can be called load expense, and then we're going to paste the code here, okay. After that, here on mount we're just going to have the following if condition, and then we're going to say if expense ID, okay, if expense ID means if this is not empty, so let's add it here, expense ID which can be equals to null by default, okay. And then we are going to say, basically we need to say we are doing editing. For example, when you are doing editing, so means you need to first update this flag is edit, then make it to true, okay. After that you need to assign the expense ID to this property, and after that we need to call the load expense, okay, load expense, like this way. And if you are not editing, so means you are supposed to create the date which should be the date of now. So let's say date, then this should be an instance of now, then you can format it to this way, and after that we need to also update the recurring that date, okay, to the same thing, like we are doing the initialization of those two dates when you are creating that. But when you are updating, so we just need to assign these values, okay, and make sure that you are updating this one. So this should be an else, okay, else like this way, okay. Yeah, so now also if this gives you error, so you can just do the facade, okay, so use the facade one, import this one. Yep, so now that's fine. And now the next step is to add the function or the computed property which will help us to get all the categories. So we are just going to say computed, okay, and then we are going to say public function categories, okay, and then we're just going to get the categories. So we're going to return category where the user ID equals to the logged in user, okay, and then we need to get those values, but remember to import this model, and then you can order by, and then you can order by name, okay. And after that, let's say when the user has let's say they are saving this actually expense, so we need to have a way to save those values because already we have defined the rules, so means we need to have a way to save our data. So to do so, we are going to define the following method called the save. So let's define it here. So public function save, and from save we are going to have the following things. So the first step is to apply the validation rules. So just call this, then validate. So this will apply the validation to all of the rules that you passed here, okay. After that, the next step is to let's say to create the data or to format the data on how the data will be on our request. So here we're just going to have the following. So on data we're going to have the user ID, which will get it from the logged in user, so you can just use this way, okay. After that, we need to have the amount, the title, description, date, category ID, and the type, okay. And after that, we need to have the if conditions to determine if the type of expense is either recurring or let's say one time. So if it is a one-time expense, means we don't need the recurring fields. So here we're just going to update the data as follows by checking the type of expense. So here you can see if the type of expense equals to recurring, so means we are going to add the frequency, start date, and end date of the recurring expense on this array of data, okay. But else means if this is a one-time expense, so we are going to run the following block, which will remove all the values of frequency, start date, and end date of the recurring expense. And then after that, we need to have another if condition, okay, which will check for the value if we are doing the edit. So if we are doing the edit, so that we can update the value accordingly. So if is edit, okay, and if that is true, so means we are going to get the expense instance here. So expense, then you find your file, then we get the expense ID, and then after that we need to have if condition for checking the authorization. Okay, so we're going to check if the user ID on that is specific expense is not the same as the user ID of the logged in user, which is this one. So we need to abort the functionality. Okay, so we need to abort that function, and after that, if that's not the case, it's just a matter of updating the value on our database. So we are going to update the expense. We call this update method, and then we pass the attribute. So the attribute is our data, which is this one. So if it is a recurring, so that data will contain this field. If not, it will not contain these fields. All these fields will be null. Okay. After that, on the else condition, if we are not doing the edit, means we are creating a new expense. So it's just a matter of adding the data on our database. So after adding the data on our database, we need to flash a session message, which is this one. Okay, so we're going to say expense created successful, similar way to the update. Okay, after update, we're going to say expense updated successful. Okay, so now that's fine. And the next thing is to pass down the categories as we get it up here. So you can see we have defined the computed property of categories, and then we need to make it to be available on your component. So categories now is available, and when you pass it here, so it should be available on your form here. So here on the form, let's update it very quickly. So as I've done on the other, so I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to paste the code, and then after that, now let's see what we have here. So the first thing that you will see, we have the outer div, and because we are using the Livewire starter kit, so you don't need to mention here the layout, because the layout will be applied automatically to all of your full page components. So here on our component, we have the outer div, then we have the header. So everything of this design is the same, but we are just changing things. So here, instead of having the add new, so because we are on the form, so this will be expenses. So this will be the link to redirect back to the expense listing. Okay. After that, we have this either edit or update the expense. Okay. So edit or add new expense. So this will check for this field that we have already defined here. So it will check for this one, which is this one. Okay, if it is true, so means it is going to be edit, and if it's not, it will going to be add new expense. So that's what we are going to even do for the this narration. And after that, we have this main content div, and it has the form, and the form is calling the save function, which we've already defined down here. So this is our save function. So make sure that it is a similar way to the one that you use here. And after that, we have the basic information card, which will show the basic information like your amount, which is this one. You have to bind that amount here, and you see, so this is the error, and here if we have an error, so that's what we are going to show. Okay, and we have the date, we have the title, so it will be the similar thing. And all of this source code, you will get them on my GitHub repository. I've already shared it on my video's description, also on the first video comment that you have pinned. Okay, and after that we have the category. So you can see on category, if you wanted to create a new category, so I have added the link here, because let's say you don't see the category that you wish to see it from here, so you can just click this one and it will direct you to the page to create the new category. Then we have the description, then we have the expense type CRUD, and here is where you are going to control, so like this is a one-time expense or recurring. So when you change those means there is something that you should update. So when it is a one-time, then we need to show this icon, and on the other way around, if it's a recurring, we are going to show the other icon. Okay, and these details are the details for, like, it will check if this is recurring, the background should be this one, and if it's one time, so the background should be this one. So these are just the control of our design. So you're going to see it actually when you start to look on the form on our browser. Okay, so after that, if it's a recurring, so you need to show these fields for adding the frequency of the recurring, and then the date when you are going to start that recurring expense, and the date where you are going to end that recurring. Okay, and after that, you see, so there is a note which shows that this expense will automatically generate new entries based on the frequency. The scheduler will run daily at midnight. So this is just to tell your users what is going to happen. So here it tells you that we are going to create a new command on our application, and that command we are going to make it to run it daily at midnight. So for now, let me just try to create just a one-time expense, and then when we reach the recurring, we can create that, and if we want to see it run on our application, we need to create the command and schedule it basically on this issue here. So here we have the form action for either cancel or either update or save, based on if we are doing the edit or we are doing creating. Okay, so for now the form is fine. Now let's go to the browser and let's refresh this one. Okay, so basically this will not work because we didn't register it to the web.php. So let's go to the web.php, and from here we're just going to do the following. We're just going to use the following route. Okay, so let's say route, then get. On this get, we're going to say expense, then create, then expense form, and then let's give it a name. It should be expense dot index. Okay, so now the new route should work. If we go back here, refresh. Okay, this is expenses create. Now let's see what we have here. Expenses. Yep, so this should be expenses. Okay, now let's refresh. Yeah, so you see now we have this add a new expense form, and you can close it to go back to the expenses. And here you can see the basic information. We have the current date that was updated automatically. We have a field to add the amount. We have the field to add the title, and the way to select the category. So you are adding the expense on which category. And also we have the description. See, so this is the description, and here the expense type is one time, and that's why you don't see the other fields additional here. So if you switch it to recurring, you should be able to see this field for frequency, which can be daily, weekly, monthly, or year, and then the start date and the end date, which is optional. So if you don't add this one, means this will not stop to generate the expenses for this recurring type of expenses. So for now, let's try to create a one-time expense. So for example, I want to do an expense of $100 on, let's say I can just say buying book, let's say books, right? And after that, for the category, it should be location. And after that, you can give the sample explanation here. So I can say blah blah. Okay, and then we need to save. So when you do the save, this should be create a new expense. Okay. Okay, so I think this is creating the data, but we didn't do the redirection. So when we save the value, we should do the redirection here. Okay, so down here we should say return redirect, and then for the route it should be expenses dot index. Okay, like that one. Okay, now let's go back to the listing. Yeah, it was not created, so let's try to recreate it again. So let's say $100. Let's say for buying books, and then here we need to select the education, then you can just say test the description here. Okay, and after that, let's try to save. Okay, now expense created successfully. Okay, but here we don't see the expense. Why we don't see the expense? Because now you see this is on start date is on 1st of October, which is right. The end date does not select. Let's try to use this way. Still we don't see anything. So let's see from the database expenses. Okay, now you see the expenses was added. That was happening here. So you have to make sure that you make this one to be a similar way to what I have here. Make sure the if conditions that you have are like these ones, and for the return statement, make sure that the sort by and the sort direction are similar to what I have here. Okay, and after that, now there is a change that I've done here on this search if condition. So when you have a search condition on your browser, so what will happen, so instead of using this directory where conditions on your query, I have left that and used this new way by using the closure. Okay, so we can see this is a closure function or a callback function, as you can see. So why I'm using this one, by creating this new object and then you pass it down here and then you apply the same where condition. So why I'm using this one is because if you use this way, so means it will give you the logical error. Why the logical error? Because the end condition or the end statement on the SQL have the higher precedence than O. Okay, so when you use this way, means the query that will be generated out of this query, it will be this way. So you see, it will be title like the term that you pass, and then O, then it will combine the description like term and category equals to a certain category ID. So means this will give you error. Why? Because the description must be equal to this one. So like you are trying to say that this one and this one should be the same. So like you are trying to give this like a must condition. Okay, so it will give you the error. So to avoid that error, so it is a good way or it is a good idea to use this way. So by using this way means you're going to generate a new query structure, which will be like this one. Okay, so the statement now will look like this one, see, which is actually true. So let me just push this one up here. Okay, yeah, it will be like this one. So it means we're going to combine the title like term or description like this one, because this was the intention of using the where or condition. Okay, and after that we are going to check if the category is the same. Okay, so this will be the correct way of doing that. So this what it happened is just combining them to be, or to group them in a one term of condition. Okay, so that's why I'm using this way. So I will just leave these comments so that you can see them when you are trying to to use it. Okay, after that, make sure that all of this remain the same. Okay, after that, now let's try again and create a new expense and see how the system will respond. So here, let's create a new expense of, let's say, $100, and this will be the date. Now let's try the title, like the similar one. So let's say buying books. Okay, so the category will be education, and after that, let's say we want to do a testy, let's say testy description. Okay, after that, leave it to one-time expense and then save. So you see now the expense has been shown here on our listing, and when you change these categories, you see, so the filter will be, you can show the filter here, so you can see that the value is not shown here. But if I go back here on education, you see I can see it, and if I go to all categories, still I'll be able to see it. But now if you go to the category on budgets, okay, if you go to the budgets, you will see the progress has started here, and you can see the total amount spent is 200, which is not correct, because if you go back down here on these cards, you can see on the card of education category on our budget, you see we've spent only $100 out of $1,000. Okay, and with the remaining is 900. But also on the overall budget, you can see we have a total budget of 1,500, but here you can see already $100 have been spent, because when you are doing this expense, we didn't select it, or we didn't allow it to be on overall. So means the overall budget that we are getting here, it is not excluding the budget of specific categories. So to avoid this error like this one, because when you do the overall expense, means you are supposed to create a new expense like this one, and then you are not supposed to select any category here. Okay, so for now, let's do the following. So let's open the code and see what is going on here. Okay, so when you go back here on your budget model, you can clearly see here on this method, which is called the get spent amount, we are checking if the category ID is there. We mean like it's not a null, and then if it's not null, we get the total spent amount for that particular month. And then if the category is null, means we are going to return these expenses. So that we are going to return all the expenses for that particular user from this scope. So this is where the issue comes in, because basically what happens, it is like when the category is null, so it is trying to return all the expenses. So it will return the ones with the category and the ones with no category. So all the overall expenses and not the overall will be included here. So that's where the problem comes in. That's why here you see we have the overall budget with 100 spent. Also you can see from here 100 spent, which is not right. So this 100 should only be spent on education, and on overall it should remain with 1,500. So to correct this one, let's update this method, because this method, the one that is used to generate all other data. So let's update this one like the following. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'll try to change this query the way I was generating it. So let me try to use this way. So instead of just checking if the category is like this way, so I can just change that logic here. For example, I can remove this before I can return it. So let me do the following. Let me create the query variable, and then from that query variable we are going to get the expense. Okay, and then from the expense we are going to say where. Then as usual we want to check for the user ID, because we want to get all the expenses that are related to the specific user. So we are going to get the user ID from here. Okay, and then here we are going to have a where condition to get the expenses for that specific month and year. So we're going to say where month. Okay, so then we pass the column called the date, which is the date for particular expense here. Okay, so date, and then we're going to say this month. Okay, so we have the month here. Also we are going to check for where year, then the year. Okay, and after that we are going to have this query, and then from that query here we're going to have an if condition that by checking the category ID. Okay, but we are not going to get the total spent month for that month. So what we are going to do is to change that logic a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going just to say here we're going to say query, and then where, then we're going to check for the category ID. Okay, and then we're going to say the category ID. Okay, and after that we are going to have an else condition. Okay, so on else block we are going to do the following. So we're just going to say if the category exists here, so we are going to get all the expenses with categories, but if category is not there, means the else block will run. So on else block we're going to say query and get the values where the field of category ID is null. Okay, so category ID like this way, and then you terminate it here. Okay, and after that we're going to return okay, we're going to return a query, then we get the sum of amount. Okay, so like this way. So now this should work as we expect, because we want to exclude the expenses with no category. So if it does not have the category, means we are going only to get the expenses with no category. Okay, so by that way we're going to get the sum which is excluding those unwanted expenses. So now let's go back to the view here, and from here you can see now this is fine. So the total spent amount is 100. You can see the remaining is 5,400. Like you can see, or is only 100 has been spent, and it has been spent specifically on budget and not on overall. Okay, so what we are going to do now, let's try to create an overall expense to see if this works well. So let me open this on new tab, and then from here I'm going to open a new expense. So let's quickly add the expense, and then from this form I'm going to create another $200 expense, and then let me say, for example, let me just use that one, grocery shopping, and I'm not going to select any category here. Okay, let me just say let me use the random expense. Okay, and then do not select any category from here. So here we can just say blah blah. Okay, and then you can save. Okay, so remember this is one-time expense, and then later on I'm going to show you on how we are going to create the recurring expenses. So now let me click save. Okay, so you can see it is loading, and now the expense was created successful, and you can see here from the expense listing, so the date and the category, you can see the category, it says it is uncategorized because we didn't select any category. So you can see the title, the description, and the amount that you have spent. So if we go back here, let's refresh again. So you see the total spent amount now is $300, and the remaining is this one. But here the thing that you are going to say is that here on the education we've only spent $100, but here on overall you can see we've spent $200. So you can see how this thing has fixed what we were doing. So on overall you can see we have spent the total of 300, and you can see here it is 100 and here it is 200. So it has just separated the concerns, and this is what we wanted. So you can see the usage percentage, which is this one, has been tracked by this progress bar. So this is fine, and I believe this works as we expected. Okay, so now the next step is to create the recurring expenses. So from the code that we have now on our budget here, you can see that it is already we've already implemented the things that we are going to suppose to use when we are creating the recurring expenses. So for example, on rules here, this will apply when you are doing the recurring expenses, and then also down here when you are saving here. Okay, see, so this is where you're going to save these fields if you are doing the recurring. So all of those I've already done it. So for now it's just a matter of creating the recurring expenses. But to make this a little bit clear, we are going to create a separate Livewire component which will let's say separate the recurring expenses and the normal expenses. So if you want to see only the recurring expenses, we are going to create the separate Livewire component. So for now here it will be for all expenses, but we are going to create another one for recurring expenses. So for now let's try to create a new expense. So let's create a new expense, and from this expense, let's say create an expense of just $50, and this will be like Netflix subscription. Okay, and after that we are not going to select any category here, so let me just leave it that way, and then I'm going to select the recurring. So when you select the recurring field, it should populate these fields with the start date and the current month. But for the end date, you can specify it, but you can specify it if it's necessary, but you are not closed to do anything here. As you can see, this is optional, means you can be able to add it or not add it. So for example, if you have you've added the subscriptions and you want, let's say, this to be continuing until when you cancel the subscription, so you can just leave this way empty. But if you want to let's say to subscribe for like 1 year, so you can put the date that ends to that date that you want. Okay, so for now I'll just leave it that way so that it can continue to regenerate these expenses. But to make that these expenses to be regenerating, so we are going to use a way of using the Laravel scheduler, and we are going to see on how it can generate the recurring expenses automatically. Okay, so for now let me just leave it this way, and then I'm going to save the expense. Okay, yep, so you can see the expense was created successful, and you can see this is expenses that we have created, and it does not have any category. Okay, so for now if you go back to the budget here and refresh, You see, so the total spent amount is this one, and you can see that was like in overall, because you see we didn't select any category. Okay, so that expense will be counted here as well. But if you want to see the recurring expenses separately, so that's when we are going to use the following recurring expense Livewire component. So let's create that very quickly, and then we are going to see on how it will work. So let me close this, and now let's go to the terminal and create a new Livewire component. Okay, so let me clear the terminal lit. So let's do PHP artisan make then Livewire. Then we are going to call it recurring expense. Okay, so this should create the new Livewire component class and the Livewire blade file. Okay, so now let's start to update the Livewire component class. So let's go to the component class here, and from this component class we are going to update the following. So the first thing will be to get all the recurring expenses. So here I'm going to have the following. Here we are going to use the computed property. So we are going to define that public function. Let's say we are going to call it recurring. Let me call it recurring expense. Okay, expenses. That sounds well. And then we are going to return the following. So remember, to make this one to be computed, so you have to use this attribute which is called the computed. Okay, which is this one. So import it. So make sure that you've imported it like this one, and from down here we are going to use the following. So to get the recurring expenses, so we are going to use the following expense. Okay, this is our model, and then from the expense we are going to call the following relationships. Okay, so the first relationship will be category, and the second one will be the child expenses. Okay, so remember that we defined this one on expenses. So let me import this expense model, okay, which is this one. So now if we go back to this model, let me just do this way, and then you can be able to go to this one. So from here you can see we define the parent expense and the child expense. So these two are very important when you are doing the recurring expenses. So from the recurring expenses, so the parent will be like the first one, the first expense you do on your recurring expense, like this one. So this one will be the parent. So all the other that will be auto-generated by the system will be acting as the child expenses. So we are going to see that when we do the code. So here you can see we call the child expenses, and from there we are going to have this is actually the local scope, so which is for user. Okay, that we defined from the expense model, and then we are going just to pass the logged in user instance. So let me just say user, then I want to get the ID of the logged in user. Okay, so that we get all the expenses for that specific user. So import the facade one, and then let's also have the following scope, which is called the recurring, that we defined here. So you can see it is called the scope recurring, and then you are going to copy to get all the expenses that have the type of recurring. Okay, so for the expense that we've created now, if you go to the database on the expenses, if you refresh, now the type of this expense that we did should be on recurring. Okay, so you can see now all of these were one time, and this one is recurring. So that's what is going to be happening here. So it is going to scope all of these record to only the record that have the recurring as their type of expense. Okay, so by calling that one, it will going to add the scope, and after that we're going to order by, then we're going to order by name. So let me say name. Okay, and then after that we are going to call the get method, okay, so that we can call those details. Okay, and after that, now we need to get all the categories. This is important, so we're going to define another computer property. So let me just copy this one, and below it we're going to get the categories, like you can say categories. Okay, and after that we're going to close that method, and then inside it we're going to return the categories that belongs to this user. So we're going to say category, okay, then where user ID belongs to the logged in user, and then we are going to get, but remember to order by their names. Okay, so we're going to say order by the name. Okay, and after that, let me squeeze this one so that the code will be reading well, and then we're going to return those values here. So let's pass them down here, and then we're going to say, so the recurring expenses will respond to this computed property, which is called the recurring expenses, which is the one that we defined here. Oh, this should be recurring expenses. So this one should be corresponding to this one, and also for the categories. So we're going to say categories, and then we're going to say this should be corresponding to the categories attribute. So all of these are computed properties. Okay, and after that, now we should be able to update this view. So this view now should have the following code that I'm going to paste here, and you guys, you are going to be able to access it on my GitHub repository. Okay, so let me go back here. So let me squeeze this one so that you can see the codes that I have here. So here you can see we have the header as usual. So we are going to have this header, you see. So this is the header that shows that we are on the recurring expenses page, and here is the button that you are going to be able to add a new expense, okay, which will direct you to the expense create, which you have already created. Here is where you're going to show the flashed messages, and after that we are going to have the stats. So these stats are the one that you are going to show that we have the active recurring expenses, the monthly total, and generated this month. Okay, so this will be the stats, and after that, and down here we're going to have the recurring expense grids, and these grids are the one that are similar to what we have on like on budgets. So these are just the copy of that on the budget, but the things that you're changing here is just you are passing the recurring expense that you get from the component here, okay, like this one, and then after that we're going to pass it here. We get the category, we get the background color for that category, and then you can see the category color, and that we have the title, and here the category name, and then after that we are going to have the action. So here we are going to have a way to edit the expense, which will direct you to the edit page of expense, and then after that we are going to have the delete button. This will call the confirm delete, and then after that the user can be able to delete the expense, but this method we have to define it. So to be able to define this method, let's go back here. Okay, so on our recurring expense component, we're going to have the following method. So let me define it above here. So first thing is to get these two properties. So the first one will be to have this show delete model. Okay, so by default it should be false. Okay, and after that we have this another public key property, which should be the expense to delete, which by default should be null. Okay, and after that we are going to define the method that we were supposed to define, which is called the confirm delete. Okay, which should have the following two things. So the first one will be to show the model, but before you show the model, you should assign the expense ID to this expense to delete. So what we're going to do is to have the following, because this method will accept the expense ID from here, which is this one. Okay, so we should accept that from here. So we should say expense ID, and then from here you can just say expense to delete should be the expense that you find from here, or you can just assign the ID here, because we don't need to make this complicated. So you can just assign this ID, and then this will be the ID for the expense to be deleted, and after that you need to define the method to delete the expense actually. So here we're going to say function delete expense. Okay, and then from this method we're going to have the following. So the first thing is to check if this user is authorized to delete this expense. Okay, so let's do the following. So if the expense to delete is found, means, let me show you, means we're going to say expense which should come from the expense model, and then we should call the find or fail. Okay, and then we are going to check for expense to delete. Okay, expense to delete. Okay, and if this is found, okay, so the first step will be to check if the user is allowed to delete this method, if it's the one that created this expense. Okay, so let's say expense user, then ID, so make sure you're using the if correctly here. Okay, and then we're going to check if it is not equals to the ID of the logged in user. So if you call the facade, so which is this one, and then if those are not equal, okay, if it is not equal, so means the user is not allowed to delete the expense, so that expense is not belonging to that user. So you're just going to say, let's say you are not authorized, and you can pass the message here if you want, but I'll just leave it that way so that Laravel can generate that message automatically. And then if the user is the one that own this expense, so we are going to do the following. So we're going to say expense, and then we're going to delete the child expenses. So child expenses, then delete. Okay, so we first delete the child expenses for that particular expense. So delete the dependent expenses, and then we are going to delete the main expense. Okay, so expense, then delete, and after that we're going to flash the session message, which should be the following. So then we flash, then we are going to have the message, then the message can be like recurring expense deleted successfully. And then after that we're going to hide the show delete model, and after that we are going to return the expense to delete id to null. Okay, so we're going to say this, then id expense to delete, which is this one, then we're going to return it to null. Okay, and after that we should be good with our code. Okay, so now the next step is just to define it in routes. Okay, so here say route, and then from there we are going to say get, then after that we are going to say recurring expenses, and then after that we're going to do the following. We're going to call the Livewire component that we created, then okay, like this way, and after that let's define the name for this route. So on the name it should be the following. So recurring expense, then I can say dot index. Okay, and after that we can be able to copy this name, and let's import this one first. Okay, and after that this name should be added on your sidebar. Okay, so from here we're going to add the recurring expenses. So let's copy this link and then update that one with this one. So recurring expenses dot index. Okay, and after that for recurring expenses let's use the following icon. So let's use this one, arrow, then path. Okay, and after that this should be also updated to here, and then here it should be recurring expenses. Okay, and after that now let's go back to the application. Okay, now we see this error, so now let's optimize our project. So PHP @sun optimize. Okay, so unable to prepare Okay, now let's see. So expense, this is a recurring expense. Okay, recurring expense. Now let's see here. Recurring expenses. No, there should be expense. Possibly we can change it from here, so it should be the same to there. Okay, so recurring expenses. Now let's try to optimize again. Okay, so now that's fine. Now refresh. Okay, so now you see recurring expenses. Now if we visit that page, oh, so here we have the error on order by, oh yeah, so this is the mistake actually. So let's correct that one. So here on expenses we don't have this field, so it should be here on categories. Okay, so now let's go back here. Yep, and here you can see, so now we have the recurring expenses, and from the recurring expenses you can see we have a way to add a new recurring expense, which should direct you to the expense form, which is this one. So let's go back to the recurring. Okay, and from here you can see these are the stats that I was showing. So the active recurring will is only one because we created only this one. So we have the monthly total and the generated this month amount. Okay, so this month we didn't generate anything, so that's why you see here it is 0. And only the cards, as I've mentioned, so this is the card. It has the edit and delete buttons, and then it shows the amount of that particular recurring expense, the frequency, which should be monthly, and you can change that to weekly or yearly. And then you will have the date which this recurring starts, and on end if you didn't provide any data, so this will be never, means it will not stop until when you cancel it yourself. Okay, and then the total generated expenses, for now it is 0 because we didn't generate anything automatically by using the Laravel scheduler, which is the next step that we are going to do in a couple of minutes. Okay, so for now this is done, and everything looks well here because we can see the expenses from here and also from the recurring expense. See, so this is how it looks like. So now the next step is to add the first the Laravel command that will auto-generate the recurring expenses, and after that we are going to add the Laravel scheduler to schedule that recurring expense to be generating the expenses based on the user frequency of generating this subscription. Okay, so let's do that very quickly. Okay, so let's go back to the code and let me zoom a little bit. Okay, so now that's good. Now let's close this, and after that let me update my code so that you can understand what I'm doing. So let me commit these changes on GitHub. So I'll say updated the recurring expense feature. Okay, and after that let me commit this, and then I'm going to sync it to the GitHub repository. Okay, and after that now let me go back to the code, and I'm going to start to generate the Laravel command. Okay, so let me clear the terminal, and from here I'm going to say php @make command. Okay, and then I'm going to call that command to be generate recurring expense. Okay, and then you click enter. Okay, So you can see now this new command has been generated inside app console commands, then generate the expense.php file has been added here. So you can see, so this is our new file that has been created, and from here by default you see it has two things. So the first one is this protected signature and protected description, then we have the public key handle method. Okay, so this is the method that will be executed when this command will be called. Okay, so let me start by updating this one. So here instead of app I can call it expenses. Okay, like this way. And then for the description you can pass any description that you want, but let me just say the following. So generate recurring expenses based on their schedule. Okay, and then after that on our handler, which is our method here, we are going to have the following. So we are going to have the info, which will trigger on the command to show the user that we have started to generate recurring expenses. Okay, then you can add something like that, and then after that we are going to have the one for generated. Okay, so let me skip it for now. Let me just focus on performing the functionality first, and then we are going to update that one. So here we're going to do the following. We're going to get the recurring expenses, okay, which should be coming from expense model. Okay, and then after that we're going to get the one with recurring. Okay, and then we're going to get, but you have to check for this where condition, where the deleted at is not equals to null. Okay, so means we're going to get all the recurring expenses where deleted at is null, means it is not deleted. Okay, because on our expense model, if you remember, we are using this soft delete, so means when the user will delete the expense, it will be deleted softly. So you can see that from the database here if you don't remember. So you can see from the database. So all of these you see, these were deleted softly. Okay, so we are just going to get the ones that have null here. Okay, so the ones that you were not deleted. Okay, so for now let me go back here and continue with this query, and then after that we are going to get the generated count. So let's create the generated count. Okay, and then after that let's start from 0. Okay, like this way, and then after that we're going to do a for each loop, and then we're going to say for every recurring expenses is going to generate this object, and then after that we are going to do the following. So the generated, okay, should be this, then we're going to define this method in a minute, generate expense for recurring, and then we're going to pass the expense, which is this one. Okay, so this method we are going to define it in a minute, and then after that we are going to increment the generated count. So generated count, okay, then we are going to amend by using this operator, and then we are going to get the generated value here. Okay, like this way. Okay, so we're going to get this one, and then we're going to add it here. Okay, and after that we are going to have this info, and then from this info we are going to show the amount of generated values. So the first method you can show it is like successfully generated, then it's a good idea to use the double comma or the double quoted. Okay, so after that we're going to say generated count, okay, recurring expenses, like that way, okay. And after that let's now define this method. So we're going to define that method down here. So we're going to say public function, then we accept that recurring expense, but we are going to pass the model, so like this way. And then after that we are going to have the following functionality, okay. So the first thing is to have an if condition. So we're going to have an if condition. So on this if condition we are going to check if the recurring expense that has been passed here can generate or should generate the next currency, okay. So if you remember, this method is already defined here, so you can see it is checking if it is recurring first, so it is checking if it's recurring, and then if it check if the end date of the recurring is after now, okay. If it is after now, means we should not be able to generate the next occurrence, but if all of these two returning false, means we are not going to generate anything. But if all of these are not returning false, means we are going to return it true, and if we return it true, so this should be returning true. And after that if it is returning false, so means we are going to do the following. We are just going to return 0, okay, and then after that we are going to, if that's not the case, means if this does not return anything, okay, or if it is returning false, so we are going to do the following. So the next occurrence or the next date should be equals to recurring expense, then get the next occurrence date. So this method is already defined here. So if you missed the previous lesson or the previous sessions, so it's a good idea to go back to those sessions and see on how we defined this method. So this method will just generate the next date based on the frequency of generating these expenses, okay. And then after that we're going to say the generated count, okay, equals to 0, and then after that we are going to generate all missing occurrence up to day, okay, by using the while, okay. So let me use this while, okay. So this is actually a while loop, okay. So from the while loop here, what we are going to do is we are going to say the next date, okay, and because you have to pass the actually the condition here, and then so this method determines if the instance is less before or equal to another, okay, and then after that it is going to check if it is less than or equal to the now instance, okay, and if that's the case, so we are going to do the following. So first we are going to check if we have already generated that expense, okay, so we're going to say exist equals to expense, okay, then where then the parent expense id, okay, equals to the recurring expense then id, okay, and then after that we're going to say where date, okay, then equals to the next date, okay. After that, then we are going to check if it exists, okay, by using this exist method, okay. So this will determine if any row exists for the current query, okay, and if that is the case, so we are going to do the following: if, then on condition we are going to say if not exists, okay, means if it does not exist at all, so this should be a variable, okay, so like that one, and then if it does not exist at all, so we are going to say this, then create expense occurrence, okay. So this is the method that we are going to define, and it accepts occurrence recurring expense and the next day, okay. So these two parameters will be accepted by this method, and after that you should be able to increment the generated count, okay, like this way. So after that, then you can be able to say this, then line, which will write a string as a standard output, and then from the line we're going to say, let me use the double quote, then the generated, then we're going to say recurring expense, then the title, and then for we're going to show the date, so next date, and then we're going to format it to the format of year, month, then date, and let me call that one like this way. And now let's create this method first, okay. So that method will be defined down here, so it should be public function, okay, and this should accept the expense, which is a recurring expense, and then the next date, okay, and then after that let me just remove this one like this way, and then after that we're going to create the expense. So we're going to call the create method, and then after that we're going to define the following array, okay, where we are going to have the following. So the first one to store in our database is the user ID that created this expense. So we're going to say recurring expense, then user ID. After that, we are going to have the category ID. So let me just copy paste this. Category ID, and then this should be category ID. Okay, we are going to have amount. Okay, we are going to have the title, the expense. So remember all of these fields we have from here. So you should be able to define them here. So then we're going to have the title, description, then we are going to have the date, then the type, but here the thing that should change on type is now we are generating the one-time expenses, okay, because we are generating them from the recurring expense, so their type now should be the one-time expense, okay. And after that we are going to define the parent expense. So parent expense ID should be the ID of the recurring expense, okay. And this is where I showed you that this is going to be the parent and the generated expenses will be the child to this particular expense, okay. And then after that we're going to define this field is auto generated, then we're going to say true, okay. And then let's terminate that. So now this method will generate the expenses, and then after that here we are going to have the following. So now this is done, and then we are going to increment the generated count, and we have this output, and then after that we are going to calculate the next occurrence, okay. So this is important occurrence, okay. And then after that we're going to say next date now should be we are going to use this method called the merge, okay, this one. And then on expression we're going to pass the following. So recurring expense, then the recurring frequency, recurring frequency, okay, of that particular expense. Now if it is corresponding to, let's start with daily, it is corresponding to daily, then the next date should copy. So this is a method provided by Carbon. So then we're going to add day, okay, like this way. So we're just going to get the next date that we had from here, which is this one, okay, and then we're just going to generate a new date, but we add just 1 day to it. So we're going to do the following, the similar thing to weekly. So if the recurring frequency corresponding to weekly, so we're just going to define, or we're just going to say the next date now should copy this next date instance, and then after that it should say add week, like this way, and similar way to monthly and yearly. So monthly, like that way, and this should add month, and this should add year. Okay, so this should be yearly, okay, like this way. And then if all of this does not work, we can return the default value, which can be corresponding to null. Okay, and then after that we have to terminate this one. Okay, and after that we are just going to have the following check down here. So we're going to check if we have firstly the end date of this recurring expense. So we're just going to say if recurring expense, then the recurring end date, okay, and the next date is not empty, and then the next date okay, and then we are going, this actually will define if the instance of this value is greater than or is after. So this is the just abbreviation of which is provided by the carbon, so it is standing for greater than another, okay. And then if it is greater than the recurring expense end date, so recurring expense end date, okay, then we should break this loop, okay. So here we should call the break, okay, like this way. All right, and after that, now for safety check, now we should be able to see if we are above now. So you can just do the following, copy paste that one, but here we're just going to check if it is above now, okay. So this will help you if you are trying to generate for the next date, so you can just break that recurring. So you can just remove this one, okay. So if you're just saying if the next date is there and the next date is greater than now, okay, so you can just break the loop, okay. So this while loop can be broken in these two ways, and those are the conditions for breaking that while loop. And then after that we are just going to return the generated count, okay. So means this method will return the generated count, which will be getted from here, and then from the generated, that is the value that is going to be added to this generated count variable here, okay. So this is what is going to be happening here on this command, and after that now is time for us to assign this one to the scheduler. So now let's go to the routes, and then on console, here on console, we're going to assign it the following. So we're just going to define that method here, and then we are just going to say schedule, okay, and then this should be coming from this facade, okay, and then we're going to say command, okay, and then after that we are just going to pass the name of the command or the signature. So if you don't remember the signature, we defined it from here. So the signature is this one. So this should be here, okay, like this way. And then after that, we're just going to say we are scheduling it to run, let's say daily at a certain time that you want. Let's say I want to run it in the middle of night, like this way, when the new date is starting. So that's when we are going to run it, okay. And then after that, we can just say it should run without overlapping, okay. So this does not allow the event to overlap to each other, okay. And then after that, you can say on success, if you want to have a more controllable way to, let's say, to log these events, so you can just say on success, okay. So this is a callback method actually. So you're just going to pass the function. So let's say function. Then on this function, you're just going to log, and then let me import this log, and then you're just going to say info. Then on our info here, we're just going to say recurring expense generated successful, okay. And then after that, you can just have another one for on failure, okay. Just say on failure, and then pass a callback function, and then after that we are going to log that we have the failed to generate recurring expenses, okay. And then after that, now this is done, okay. So now it is a time to test if this command works as we expected. So for now, for you to be able to see if this works, so you can just do the following. So you can say php @sun, then schedule list to see when it will be the next time to run this command, okay. So you can see this command is due to run on the next 2 hours, okay. But because this is a long time to wait for, so for now I can just let's say change that, let's say to instead of running daily, so I can just say after every, let's say every 15 seconds, okay. Yeah, so let me do that. So let's say after every 15 seconds. So let's see, so it is due to run on 3 seconds to come. So now let me do the following. Let me clear it, and now let's run the following. So php @sun schedule then work, okay. So this will run this command when the time will be for that command to run. So now let's see if nothing is giving us an error. So let's see if the command works well. So you see, so the command is running, and you can see the command was done. Okay, so if the command was done, we are supposed to see that it generated the next occurrence of our expense. Okay, so you can see after another 15 seconds, it will generate another expense, but it will check if the expense is already generated, so it will not be generated again. So that will be this check. So now let me first stop it. Okay, and then let me go back here and let me refresh. So this is our recurring expense. Now let's go to the expenses, and you can see here this expense for the November is already here. That's why we don't see anything here. So what you can do, let's say we can just so we didn't find the expense edit page, so let's define that in our web.php file very quickly here. So we can just say here, so we can just say route get, then we can say expenses, then we need to bind the expense ID here, expense ID. Okay, and then after that we can say edit, and then we can direct to the expense form, and then we can call the class method here, and then we can give it a name, and the name should be expenses.edit, like that way. Okay, so now this should work. So now let's go back and refresh. Okay, call to a member function format on null. So let's see on expense form. So the recurring end date is this way. Oh yeah, so I see this issue here. So on the expense form, we have formatted this recurring end date while it is empty. Okay, so if the expense does not have the end date, so this will give you an error. So for now, let me just remove this one, and then let's try to refresh. Yep, so this works well. So I want to return this a 1 month back. So for example, on October, and then I can just say this was the date. Okay, and then let me update. Okay, so yeah, so now we don't see it here. So we are expecting to generate a new expense for November, because that one was for October. So if I go back to the October date, so for example, if I go back to October, like this one, so we should be able to see it down here. So now let's use the scheduler to generate that one for October. Okay, so now let's try for November. So now let's try to run the scheduler. So after 15 seconds, it should be able to generate a new expense. Okay, so this shows that it is done. So now let's see if this has generated the expense for this month. So now let's see. Let's refresh this one. Okay, so nothing has been generated here. Okay, now let's see why this does not generate the expense. So let me stop it. Okay, the first way to debug this, we can just run it as a normal command because we've already defined that command here and we have this signature. So let me clear this and you can just run php at sun, then expenses, then generate recurring expense. Okay, and then after that let's click enter. So you can see it started to generate recurring expense, but it successfully generated 0 recurring expenses. So if it generates 0 expenses, means there is this command that does not run as we expected. So when it run here, so generate recurring expenses, here you can see we get the ID, should generate the next occurrence. So here it should check for that recurring end. Okay, is recurring. Okay, and after that we check for the end date. Okay, so now that is fine, and then get the next occurrence. Now let's see to get the date. Okay, so if the CRUD is not found, okay, okay, so here I guess now we can be able to track this by using the following method. So for example, we can get here the next occurrence, so we can be able to log it. So for example, we want to show the next occurrence here so that we can be able to know if it is generating correctly. So we can just say next date here. Okay, and then after that, now let's run again the command. Okay, so 0 occurrence or expense has been generated. So now let's check on the Laravel log. Okay, so let me actually rerun again so that we can have something very clear. Okay, so now that's fine. Now let's go to the Laravel logs. So go to the storage, logs, and then laravel.log, and from here you can see the next occurrence date is on the December of 5. Okay, so means now we don't see any expense because this is the date where this expense will start to work. This is affected by the date that you will put at the start date. Okay, so let's check from here. So our expense, we've returned it back to October, so let's go back to October. So this one, you see, so the start date for this expense is the one that is affecting us. So let's see from here. So the start date, we have put it to start on 5 of November. Okay, so that's why now we are not able to see the effect. So let's make it to start, let's say on 5 of October. Okay, and let's update. So means now the next occurrence should be the 5 of November, which is our current time. So now we are going to do the following thing. So now let's rerun again the command, and you can see, so the generated is for this one, and it has been generated on this date, and you can see here we have generated one expense. So means the command was run successful and it generated the expense as we expected. So now if I refresh here, I should be able to see the expense, and you can see the expense is generated on this date, and you can see it is uncategorized. The name of the or the title, it is Netflix subscription, and you can see there is this tag which is auto generated, and you can see the amount is the similar amount as the one for its parent, and you can see the amount is the same. So from the database you should be able to see that expense generated down here. Okay, so you see, so we have this one, see, so it is a one-time expense, and here it has the parent ID of this one, which should be this one. Okay, so that works as we expected, and from this perspective means we are now done with generating the categories, budget, expenses, and the recurring expenses. So the next step is to create the dashboard with all the stats as we have seen from the demo. So on the next video we are going to deal with the dashboard, and then when we are done with the dashboard is when we are going to integrate the API for AI smart recommendations. So that will be the last thing that we are going to perform on our video. So the next step, we're going to finish with the dashboard, and after that I'm going to be back on this one, and then we are going to integrate the Gemini AI APIs that will help us to have the smart recommendations for the amount of budget that we should use to generate the new budgets. So for now, let me say thank you and see you on the next video.